One early morning, just as I was pouring my coffee, a thunderous crash split the calm air. My wooden ranch gate, the one I had built with my own hands, exploded into splinters as a sleek black SUV tore straight through it without hesitation. I froze on my porch, mug in hand, watching as the driver, an immaculately dressed woman with a smug tilt of her head, didn't even glance back. She simply pressed harder on the gas, leaving nothing but dust and shattered wood in her wake. I'm a man in my early 50s, with silver streaks threading through my hair, the kind of fellow who favors faded blue work shirts, worn jeans, and scuffed leather boots. After 30 years designing security systems, I finally retired to a quiet patch of land on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a small suburban community with manicured lawns and an HOA that runs like a miniature kingdom. My land was my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe freely without neighbors telling me how tall my grass should be. Across the road reigned Linda, the HOA president, always in a sharp red blazer, pearl necklace gleaming, and heels clicking like a metronome of authority. She carried a sleek tablet as though the entire neighborhood existed for her inspection. Peace, however, didn't last long once Linda decided my private gate was her personal shortcut. The first time Linda drove through my gate, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was late. Maybe her GPS glitched and sent her down my private road. I didn't even yell or wave my arms. I just stood there in my yard, scratching my head as her shiny black SUV tore across the gravel and disappeared in a cloud of dust. I told myself, let it go. Accidents happen. But something about the way she never slowed down, never looked apologetic, gnawed at me like a splinter under the skin. A week later, the second incident left no room for excuses. I was right there, tightening a hinge on the gate, when I heard the hum of her engine. Linda's SUV rolled up like a shark gliding through shallow water. Her window was down just enough for me to see the curl of her lips. A smirk, not embarrassment, not regret, a deliberate, mocking smirk. Then her tires screamed as she gunned it forward. The gate groaned, split, and toppled to the ground. Dust hit my face before I even realized what happened. She didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. That smirk was her message. This land is mine to take. I spent the evening repairing the gate, my hands raw from the splinters. I was still sore the next morning when an envelope appeared in my mailbox. HOA letterhead, bold and official-looking, with words that made me laugh out loud at first. Notice of violation non-compliant structure. According to Linda, my gate violated community aesthetic standards and had to be removed within 30 days. That would have been amusing if not for the fact that I wasn't even a member of the HOA. My land was outside their jurisdiction, completely private. Yet there it was, Linda's signature scrawled neatly at the bottom like a stamp of authority. I crushed the letter in my fist and tossed it in the trash, muttering, "Over my dead body." The harassment didn't stop with paper threats. One warm evening, I was on the porch sipping iced tea when I heard music. Loud music. The kind that rattles windows and makes your teeth vibrate. I stepped off the porch, just in time to see headlights bouncing down my driveway. Linda was in the lead car, her SUV polished to a mirror shine, 2 HOA board members trailing behind in sedans. They blasted pop music, laughing, waving their arms out the windows as if they were teenagers at a tailgate party. Tires ripped through my grass, leaving ugly scars across the property I had worked years to maintain. I yelled, my dogs barked, but they didn't even slow down. Linda leaned out her window just long enough to shout, "Public access, darling," before disappearing into the night. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles went white. A few days later, it escalated in a different way. I was out fixing a fence post when I noticed 3 men in matching polo shirts strolling across my yard. Clipboards in hand, cameras dangling from their necks, they examined everything with smug expressions. One of them snapped photos of my barn. Another measured the length of my fence, and a third tapped notes onto a tablet. "What do you think you're doing?" I barked. "Routine OA inspection," one replied coolly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You've got no authority here," I shot back. "Sir," the man said, not even looking up, Failure to comply will result in fines. I laughed bitterly. Failure to get off my land will result in trespassing charges. Want me to call the sheriff right now? They muttered, exchanged glances, then slunk away. But before leaving, one of them snapped a final photo of my hay bales stacked by the shed, as if bales of hay were somehow a violation of suburban aesthetics. The absurdity would have been comical if it weren't so invasive. By now, I barely slept at night. My dogs barked at every sound. I kept a flashlight by the door, and sure enough, one night, the nightmare came true. A thunderous crack split the silence, followed by frantic barking. I ran outside barefoot, the cold gravel biting into my feet. My gate once again was nothing but rubble scattered across the driveway. In the distance, red taillights vanished into the dark. It was Linda. She hadn't even tried to hide it. She wanted me to know it was her. My chest heaved with rage, but underneath the anger was something worse: humiliation. She had reduced me, a man who had spent 30 years designing systems to keep people safe, to a helpless victim on my own land. The final insult came on a Saturday morning. I was mending fence posts when I heard engines. Not one, not two, a whole convoy. A line of HOA vehicles rolled toward me like a parade. SUVs and sedans gleamed under the sun, each one filled with residents smirking like they were part of some victory march. Linda led the charge, waving through her open window as though she were the mayor of Silver Creek. They didn't even slow down. They smashed through my gate again, tires crunching over the wreckage. Laughter spilled from the cars as neighbors snapped photos. One even shouted, "Nice driveway, buddy," before disappearing down the road. I stood frozen, tools still in my hands, my stomach twisted with fury. This wasn't just Linda anymore. She had rallied the entire board and maybe even some of the community against me. That afternoon, as if to hammer the nail deeper, another thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one carried a list of fines totaling several $1,000s. Page after page accused me of unauthorized modifications, unaesthetic property use, and obstruction of community access. At the bottom of each page was my name, my supposed signature. I stared at the documents in disbelief. The signatures weren't mine. They had forged them. They had crossed the line from harassment into fraud. My hands trembled as I shuffled through the stack. All at once, everything clicked. This wasn't about a shortcut. This wasn't about a gate. Linda wanted to crush me, strip me of dignity, of land, of the quiet sanctuary I had worked my whole life to build. And as I stood on my porch, papers fluttering in the evening wind, a strange calm settled over me. For years, people had underestimated me. To the community, I was just the quiet man with silver in his hair, tinkering on machines, content to fade into the background. But they didn't know me. They didn't know what 30 years of building security systems had taught me. They didn't know how patient I could be. Linda thought she had won, but she had no idea what kind of man she had just declared war on. I rebuilt the gate once again, but this time my hands didn't shake with frustration or exhaustion. They moved with precision, like a craftsman at his bench. From the outside, it looked like ordinary cedar planks, sturdy enough to match the rustic charm of my land. But beneath that cedar lay the true core, industrial-grade steel, anchored in concrete sunk deep into the earth. It was no longer just a gate. It was a trap wrapped in wood, a quiet declaration that I was done being a victim. I worked for days under the hot sun, sweat soaking through my shirt, dirt caked on my boots, and yet I felt calm. Every strike of the hammer and turn of the wrench grounded me. Linda had mistaken my silence for weakness. She had no idea that silence was simply strategy. For 30 years I had designed systems to protect banks, airports, and government facilities. Did she really think I couldn't protect a simple gate? Of course, I didn't stop there. Old instincts woke up in me, instincts I thought I had left behind when I retired. I went to work on my property as if it were a fortress. Hidden cameras tucked into fence posts, motion sensors camouflaged beneath the grass, pressure plates buried where tires would roll, even license plate readers disguised as birdhouses. I knew how to make security invisible, the kind that didn't just watch but anticipated. By the time I finished, my quiet ranch looked unchanged to the naked eye, but in reality, it was one of the most carefully monitored private lots in Silver Creek. The trap sprung quicker than I expected. One evening, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, I heard it again. Engines. The familiar rumble of Linda's SUV leading her little convoy. Music blared. Laughter carried on the breeze. They thought this was just another night of sport, another chance to grind humiliation deeper into my bones. But when Linda slammed her bumper against my cedar gate, the sound was different this time. A metallic clang echoed through the air, followed by a horrific screech of tearing paint and crunching steel. Her SUV jolted to a stop, the hood crumpling like paper. For the first time, Linda was the one caught off guard. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching through my monitors as she leapt from the car, heels clicking on gravel, her face twisted in rage. She shouted at the board members trailing behind her. They tried to push the gate, tried to pry at it, but it didn't budge an inch. My dogs barked furiously, and after a few minutes of chaos, she had no choice but to retreat, tires spitting gravel as she sped off into the night. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. Every second had been captured on video, time-stamped, crystal clear, indisputable. The look on her face when the gate didn't fall, it was better than any revenge I could have imagined. The next morning, as if to mask her humiliation, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one wasn't just a violation notice. It was an order demanding I remove the unauthorized barricade immediately or face escalating fines. Barricade. That was the word she used. As though I had built some wartime blockade instead of simply defending my own land. But something caught my attention. An attached expense report, supposedly proving how much the HOA had spent maintaining community access. The numbers were bloated, absurd. Asphalt repairs for a road that was already pristine. Landscaping costs for land that had never been touched. Security upgrades that didn't exist. My instincts sharpened. This wasn't just petty bullying. This was fraud. That night, as I pored over the papers at my kitchen table, a knock came at the door. My dogs perked up, but didn't growl. When I opened the door, Linda's husband stood there. He looked smaller without her presence, overshadowing him nervous eyes, hunched shoulders, hands trembling slightly as he held out a thick envelope. "You didn't get this from me," he whispered. His voice cracked with something that sounded a lot like fear. "But you need to know what she's been doing." Inside the envelope were copies of financial reports, pages and pages of them. My stomach tightened as I scanned the numbers. Linda had been siphoning money out of the HOA for years. Fake expenses, inflated contracts, community security. That was nothing more than a line item funneling money into a private account. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was greedy, reckless, and sloppy enough to leave a paper trail. But the real blow came when I compared those documents to my own deed. In black and white, filed and recorded decades earlier, it was clear the so-called community access road Linda had been fighting for wasn't community property at all. It belonged to me, every inch of it. She had been trespassing, forging documents, and embezzling HOA funds, all while pretending it was about neighborhood standards. I looked up at Linda's husband. He avoided my gaze, staring at the floor like a man who had lived too long under her thumb. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked quietly. His lips trembled. "Because she won't stop until she destroys you. She's convinced herself she can get away with anything. But the more she pushes, the more reckless she gets. And if someone doesn't stop her," he trailed off, shaking his head, "I don't want to be dragged down with her when it all burns." I studied him for a long moment. There was no pride in his face, no loyalty left, just exhaustion and desperation. I took the envelope, nodded once, and said, "You did the right thing." After he left, I spread the documents across my table. On one side, the photos from my hidden cameras, clear shots of Linda smashing my gate, leading convoys, trespassing again and again. On the other, the financial records, proof of embezzlement. And in the middle, my deed, irrefutable evidence that the land she wanted wasn't hers to touch. For weeks, she had played offense while I scrambled to defend. But now the field had shifted. I had the proof, the leverage, the truth. And truth, in the right hands, cuts sharper than any blade. I glanced out the window at my disguised steel gate. The morning sun glinted off its cedar surface, hiding the fortress beneath. To anyone else, it was just another ranch gate. But to me, it was a symbol. She had thought it was weakness, a fence to be broken. Instead, it had become the pivot point of her undoing. Linda wanted to play by the rules of law. Very well. I would bring the law down on her so hard it would rattle the very foundations of her precious HOA. And this time, I wasn't just going to defend my gate. I was going to take everything she thought she controlled and turn it against her. It started with a flyer slipped into every mailbox in Silver Creek. Special HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. The bold letters were impossible to miss, and the date circled in red gave me only a week to prepare. Linda wasn't wasting time. After her humiliation at my gate, she was ready to reassert her authority, to drag me into the center of the community she controlled, and grind me into dust in front of everyone. I spent that week in silence, poring over my evidence. Camera footage, time-stamped images of Linda's SUV smashing my gate, video of her convoy laughing as they treated my land like a parade ground, copies of forged fines with signatures that were not mine, and the prize at the center of it all, the financial records her husband had slipped me, exposing years of embezzlement. Every night, I laid it out across my dining table like a general planning a campaign. By the time the meeting arrived, I was ready. The community hall was already buzzing when I walked in. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows, a cheap podium at the front, and a projection screen ready to display whatever narrative Linda had prepared. Residents filled the room, murmuring in anticipation. Some looked annoyed, others curious, but most carried the same expression: obedience. Linda had ruled them for years, and tonight she intended to remind them who held the gavel. She entered with all the pomp of royalty, heels clicking against the linoleum, her red blazer sharp enough to cut glass. The board members flanked her like bodyguards, clipboards in hand. She took her place at the podium, smiling with the confidence of someone who had never once lost control. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth, commanding. "We have an urgent matter to address tonight, one that affects the safety, aesthetics, and harmony of our community." Her eyes swept across the crowd before landing on me. She didn't look away. "One resident has consistently violated standards, obstructed access, and defied the rules we all agreed to uphold. His reckless behavior has endangered not only property, but the very image of Silver Creek." Murmurs rippled through the audience. I stood still in the back, arms crossed, letting her spin her web. She pulled out a stack of papers and waved them in the air. "Here are the fines, the violations, the evidence. This resident has built an unauthorized barricade, damaged community property, and refused compliance with repeated notices. Enough is enough. We must take action." A few heads nodded. Others frowned. Someone whispered, "Who's she talking about?" Though everyone already knew. Linda leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I am speaking of the man across the road, the one who thinks he's above our rules." Gasps and whispers filled the room. All eyes turned to me. Linda straightened, clearly relishing the spotlight. "I recommend we move to legal proceedings against him. We cannot allow one man's arrogance to threaten the order we've built here." I let the silence stretch, then stepped forward slowly, the folder of evidence under my arm. My boots echoed against the floor as I walked to the podium. Linda's smile faltered, just slightly. "May I asked, gesturing toward the microphone. "This is an HOA board matter," she snapped. "And I'm the man you just accused," I replied evenly. "If you're going to put me on trial, you'll let me speak." The room stirred. Residents looked at each other, curious, uneasy. Linda hesitated, then stepped aside with a smirk, clearly convinced I would embarrass myself. I set the folder on the podium, opened it, and began. "For weeks, I've been accused of violating rules that do not apply to me. I am not, nor have I ever been, a member of this HOA. My land is private. My gate is mine. But Linda here decided otherwise. She trespassed. She vandalized. She forged documents with my name. Yeah. I lifted the first page and held it up. A stack of fines bearing my falsified signature. Gasps rippled through the room. I passed copies to the front row, letting them spread through the audience. And when intimidation didn't work, she escalated. I pulled out a remote, clicked it, and the projection screen lit up. Footage from my hidden cameras filled the room. Linda's SUV plowing through my gate. Her convoy of board members laughing as they crossed my property. Clear as day, undeniable. The room erupted in whispers, shock, outrage. Linda's face went pale, then flushed crimson. This is taken out of context, she sputtered. He fabricated. The next video silenced her. Her SUV slamming against the steel-reinforced gate, sparks flying, her face twisted in rage as she cursed at her board members. The audience gasped audibly. One woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "That's criminal." I let the murmurs swell before delivering the final blow. And while she bullied me, she was stealing from all of you. I pulled out the financial reports, flipping through them for the crowd. Thousands of dollars siphoned out of HOA funds. Fake expenses, road maintenance that never happened, landscaping no one ever saw. And the kicker? The so-called community road she claims to defend isn't community property at all. I held up my deed, the legal document stamped and signed. It's mine, every inch of it. She has been trespassing, embezzling, and lying to you for years. The room erupted. Residents shouted over each other, some in disbelief, others in fury. A man stood up, pointing at Linda. "You told us our dues went to new drainage systems." Another woman shouted, "Where's the security cameras we paid for?" A chorus of voices rose, angry, demanding answers. Linda slammed her fists against the podium. "Lies, all of it. He's manipulating you. Don't you see? He's dangerous. Paranoid he set up spy cameras." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They turned on her, their trust unraveling. Even the board members shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting anywhere but at their president. I stepped back from the podium, letting the chaos speak for itself. The evidence was there. The truth was undeniable. Linda shouted louder, her voice cracking with desperation. "I built this community. I kept order. And you," she pointed at me, her face contorted with rage, "you think you can destroy me?" Before she could spiral further, the doors opened, and two uniformed officers walked in. Someone must have called the police as the shouting escalated. The room went silent. The officers approached the podium. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. You're being placed under investigation for trespassing, forgery, and suspected embezzlement." Gasps filled the hall. Residents leaned forward, whispering furiously. Linda's face crumbled. For the first time, the mask slipped. She looked small, desperate, scrambling for control. "This is a mistake," she screamed. "You're all ungrateful. Everything I did was for this community." But the handcuffs clicked shut, her protests drowned out by the murmurs of her former supporters. And then, something I hadn't expected happened. The room applauded. Tentative at first, then stronger, louder, until the hall echoed with clapping and cheers. People stood, nodding at me, shaking my hand as I walked back down the aisle. Their relief was palpable relief. That someone had finally stood up, that justice had caught up with her arrogance. For the first time in months, Linda had no voice left to drown out the truth. The days after Linda's arrest felt strangely calm, almost unnervingly so. For months I had lived with tension wound tight in my chest, always bracing for the next crash at the gate, the next envelope stuffed with false fines, the next humiliation staged in broad daylight. And suddenly, it was gone. No SUVs idled at the edge of my driveway. No strangers with clipboards trespassed across my yard. My gate stood tall and unbroken, its cedar planks warm under the sun, steel hidden beneath, silent and strong. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful, like the first breath after a storm finally breaks. Linda's downfall spread through Silver Creek faster than gossip ever had. One week she was strutting around in her red blazer, barking orders into her tablet like a general commanding troops. The next, she was a pariah, stripped of her title, her power, and the smug certainty that she could bend an entire community to her will. Her allies melted away as if they had never known her. The HOA board resigned en masse, claiming ignorance, though I suspected at least a few of them had enjoyed the perks of her embezzlement. And Linda herself? She disappeared in the dead of night, her family loading boxes into moving trucks while the neighborhood slept. No farewell parties, no kind words, just the glow of taillights vanishing down the road. At first I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, maybe even hungry for more justice, the kind you savor like a fine meal. But what I felt was something quieter, heavier, relief. Not just for myself, but for everyone who had lived under her thumb. For the couple who once told me they were fined because their flower beds weren't uniform enough. For the single mother who paid extra dues because Linda claimed her children's bicycles were community hazards. For every neighbor who had rolled their eyes behind closed doors but lacked the courage or the evidence to fight back. In the weeks that followed, the HOA scrambled to rebuild. Emergency elections were held. New leadership stepped forward, ordinary neighbors, not wannabe tyrants. At the first open meeting, they did something Linda never once considered. They asked for input. Residents were stunned. People raised their hands, shared ideas, argued politely, even laughed together. They voted to review every bylaw, to cut unnecessary fees, to publish budgets openly so no dollar went unaccounted for again. Transparency became their rallying cry, and for once, I believed them. The neighborhood began to look less like Linda's kingdom and more like an actual community. To my surprise, they asked me to serve as an advisor for security matters. "You're the one who stood up when no one else did," one man told me, shaking my hand firmly. "You know how to spot trouble before it festers. We need that." I hesitated. I had fought so hard for my independence that the thought of joining any committee, even as an advisor, felt like shackling myself again. But this time, the request wasn't about control. It was about trust. They weren't handing me power, they were asking for wisdom. And wisdom, I realized, is worth sharing. So I agreed, under one condition, that the HOA never forget its purpose, not to lord over lawns or dictate paint colors, but to serve the people who lived here. They nodded solemnly, as if swearing an oath. For once, it wasn't empty ceremony. I could see it in their eyes. They had learned the hard way what happens when power goes unchecked. One evening, not long after, I walked out to my gate and rested a hand against the cedar. Beneath it, the steel waited, hidden and unyielding. To anyone passing by, it looked like any other country gate, plain, sturdy, ordinary. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a reminder. That strength doesn't always announce itself. That patience can outlast arrogance. That dignity, once defended, becomes unbreakable. As I stood there, a neighbor pulled up in his pickup truck. He rolled down the window, gave me a nod, and said, "That gate of yours, it's more than wood and steel, isn't it?" I chuckled softly. "It's proof that some things are worth protecting." He grinned, tipped his cap, and drove off, leaving me alone with the fading light. His words lingered. Proof. Yes, that was it. Proof that when bullies rise, they fall harder. Proof that justice isn't about loud speeches or dramatic gestures, it's about persistence, about refusing to yield no matter how many times you're pushed. Later that night, as the crickets sang and the stars blanketed the sky, I sat on my porch with my dogs curled at my feet. The air was cool, carrying the smell of cut grass and distant wood smoke. I thought about Linda, how someone so determined to control others had ended up losing everything because she underestimated the quiet man across the road. And I thought about how many people, in places far beyond Silver Creek, were fighting their own battles against unseen bullies, against unjust rules, against voices that tried to drown out truth. That's the thing about gates. They're not just wood and hinges. They're symbols of boundaries, boundaries everyone deserves to set and defend. Sometimes those gates are physical, like mine. Sometimes they're invisible. Your dignity, your privacy, your right to stand on your own land without fear. And someone, somewhere, will always try to push through them. The question isn't whether they'll try. It's whether you'll stand behind your gate and say, "No further." I don't consider myself a hero. Heroes wear capes, leap into burning buildings, or save cities from disasters. I'm just a man with silver in his hair, calluses on his hands, and a stubborn streak that won't quit. But maybe that's enough. Maybe standing firm, refusing to bow, is its own kind of heroism. When I look at my gate now, I don't see the wreckage it once became, splintered and trampled. I see endurance. I see the faces of my neighbors finally free from tyranny. I see the weight of justice not heavy, but grounding, steady. And sometimes, when the wind whistles through the cedar planks, I imagine it's whispering a reminder: justice doesn't need to shout. It simply stands. So I ask myself, as I sit here in the quiet aftermath, what gate in your life is waiting to be defended? Because sooner or later, someone will test it. They'll push, they'll prod, they'll demand. And when they do, the steel inside you, the part no one sees, will decide whether it holds. Mine held, and it always will.